This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Leaders and experts gather in the Spanish capital for an important climate forum amid serious concerns about global warming. France and Mali pay tribute to fallen French soldiers, but another deadly attack reported in Burkina Faso. And the contributions of African women leaders recognized in Guinea. Hello and welcome to CGTN. This is Africa Live and I'm Karen Roberts in Nairobi. Also coming up in the program. In business, Nigeria's power sector gets a $210 million boost from the African Development Bank. And thousands of delegates gather in the Rwandan capital to discuss challenges and opportunities of managing HIV and AIDS. We begin in Spain, where a major climate change conference is being held in Madrid. More than 20,000 delegates will be meeting for the next 2 weeks in Madrid for COP25. This is the annual United Nations conference seeking primarily to find ways of combating global warming. Ahead of the climate change conference, the head of the United Nations stressed the need for immediate and serious action.
Our war against nature must stop, and we know that that is possible. The scientific community has provided us with a roadmap to achieve this. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we must limit global temperatures rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, reach carbon neutrality by 2050, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 45% from 2010 levels by 2030.
Well, to get more information on this, we are now joined by CGTN's Filio Contrafuri with the latest information. Filio, what is on the main agenda of this major UN climate change conference?
Well, you know, Karen, there are so many issues to be tackled during this UN climate conference, yet the main thing on the agenda was and remains finalizing the rule book of the 2015 Paris Agreement that is putting the final touches on any unresolved issues that were left unresolved during 2015, and that's like carbon markets, so that the Paris Agreement will start getting implemented next year, 2020, when the Kyoto Agreement expires. But this UN conference is coming with a backdrop that so many reports have been coming out lately, highlighting just how urgent it is that this climate change is being tackled and that it is becoming an emergency. Now, the planet is on track for 3.2 degrees Celsius warming above pre-industrial levels by 2100, and according to a latest major UN report, the goal of the Paris Agreement to keep that warming around 1.5 degrees Celsius, it seems that is a target that is on the brink of becoming impossible. Recently, there was another report by Save the Children saying that Africa right now, because of climate change, there are 33 million people who are at emergency levels of food insecurity because of floods, because of cyclones. So all the leaders, all the delegations who will be attending this conference will be under a lot of pressure to do more to try and cut immediately the greenhouse emissions. And according to the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who gave a presser here yesterday, he said that the world is facing, and I quote, a full-blown climate emergency. And he said that the point of no return is no longer over the horizon. So these are some of the main issues to be tackled here, Karen.
So unresolved issues from the Paris 2015 agreement that they need to resolve. Should we expect sharp divisions on ways to curb greenhouse gas emissions? Or is there, do you think, an improved mechanism to reach a consensus this time around?
Well, I mean, this conference is just starting, and it is expected that the participants will address the issue of raising ambitions to cut emissions. Yet, as of now, there doesn't seem to be a lot of consensus on several issues. There have been some indications that EU leaders will try to find some consensus among the 27 member bloc, so that as a bloc, the European Union together will say that they are prepared to make greater cuts of emissions. And this is something that, you know, they will try and agree on. But at the same time, we shouldn't forget that this is a climate conference where the United States will not be officially represented. There will only be a symbolic representation, and that's because the Trump administration has withdrawn the United States from the Paris Climate Agreement. And we shouldn't forget that the United States is, you know, the #1 contributor to the climate emergency. So that will not really help solve some of the issues. And then it's finding consensus on how will the big emitters will be compensating, the rich countries will be compensating the poorer countries that have been suffering the most destruction and devastation from climate change, as you know, the cost of climate change is becoming one of the main issues. So it will be complicated the next 2 weeks as world leaders here are trying to discuss and solve this climate emergency. Karen.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Filio. That was CGTN's Filio Contrafuri there with the latest information from the UN Climate Change Conference taking place right now in Madrid. Well, Somalia has been one of the worst hit countries by climate change. From the country's capital, Mogadishu, here's CGTN's Abdulaziz Billo with a report on how the country is coping with the effects of global warming.
Recent floods in Somalia displaced more than 300,000 people, the worst to hit the country in decades. The central Somali town of Beledweyne was the worst affected. The latest flooding is the second to affect the agricultural town in less than a year.
We have seen lots of problems, floods that's caused by the two rivers, and at the same time droughts that follow them. And again, it is something what we used to experience in 8 years, now it's becoming year in and year out.
Food insecurity compounded by several climatic shocks have made the Horn of Africa nation remain in the grip of one of the most complex and long-standing crises in the world. For the past decade, the country has undergone several deadly natural disasters, including a devastating famine 8 years ago that claimed more than 250,000 lives. Experts attribute the causes to deforestation, soil erosion, and lack of environmental awareness. Conservationists argue that global warming is affecting the Indian Ocean on a scale that could have disastrous consequences. Heavy rains have also destroyed homes in coastal towns, including Mogadishu. Heavy downpour has also destroyed basic infrastructure in populated cities.
We have seen that the Indian Ocean has changed a lot. The temperatures that's being recorded on the surface of the Indian Ocean is really different than what we used to see. Apart from that, pressures. So these two parameters, the atmospheric pressure and the temperature of the Indian Ocean, those drastic changes have an effect.
In Puntland and Somaliland, successive cyclones in the two regions claimed several lives, including fishermen who perished in the high seas. Pastoralists in both regions also say strong winds accompanied by heavy rainfall claimed the lives of thousands of livestock.
Previously, we used to see cyclones in India, Bangladesh, Burma, which is Myanmar at the moment. But those cyclones now we are seeing that they are moving a little bit west, reaching the Gulf of Oman and Yemen and Somalia. Particularly the last 2 or 3 years, there were cyclones, successive cyclones, in which we had seen rainfall that has caused a lot of problems.
The government and the United Nations are struggling to tackle illegal charcoal trade in southern Somalia. Authorities in these regions have also been urged to plant more trees to protect the environment. Across schools and universities, volunteers have begun campaigns of educating people on the importance of protecting the environment. Others have begun planting trees in public spaces to ensure that the next generation don't suffer from man-made climate disasters. Abdul Aziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
At least 14 people have been shot dead in eastern Burkina Faso. That's according to government officials who say that the attack on a church happened on Sunday morning. It took place in the village of Hantukoura near Burkina Faso's border with Niger. The area is known for banditry but has also seen a spate of attacks from suspected jihadist groups with links to Al-Qaeda and ISIL. This latest incident occurred during worship. It mirrors other attacks on Christians this year, a relatively new phenomenon for Burkina Faso, which prides itself on religious tolerance. This year's violence has killed hundreds and has forced nearly 1 million people from their homes. Meanwhile, the French military on Sunday repatriated the bodies of the 13 soldiers who were killed during a combat mission in Mali. The French troops died in late November when 2 helicopters collided mid-air while pursuing jihadist militants in the dark. It was the single biggest loss of French troops in the region in nearly 4 decades. To combat terrorism in the region, France has been offering military support to Mali since 2013. Across West Africa, there are now 4,500 French soldiers working to counter the Islamist insurgency. Militant violence linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIL has been increasing in the region over the years. Terror groups often use Mali as a launch pad for attacks across the territory. Well, we can now talk to Deji Badmus. The insecurity in Burkina Faso is dangerously close to getting out of hand. What more can you tell us about this latest attack?
Well, Karen, just as you've said, the attack actually happened in the eastern town of Hantukoura. That town shares a border. It's close to the border now with Niger. And what we know is that some suspected jihadists, unknown gunmen, so to speak, came to that church. It's a Protestant church. They came to the church on scooters and then opened fire, killing the pastor of the church and killing some children. Altogether, 14 persons were killed, several of them injured. And they met no resistance at all. After they are done with their operation, they mounted their scooters and left. It's actually not the first time, as you've reported, that we've seen an attack of this nature. We saw a similar attack on a mosque in October, where 15 persons were also killed. So it's something that is becoming all too frequent now in Burkina Faso, where churches and mosques are targeted by suspected jihadis, Karen.
And Deji, Mali too is having security challenges, as we know. How is the government coping with this challenge?
Well, it's a tough one for the government of Mali, just as it's tough for the government of Burkina Faso. The fact is that the entire countries in the Sahel region are finding it difficult to cope with this security challenge. They're getting overwhelmed, so to speak. You have so many ungoverned spaces in this area, and it's just not practically possible now for the government to be able to provide security for all of these places. And that's the reason why these jihadis are taking advantage of that situation now to carry out attacks. They're creating their own government in ungoverned spaces, if you like. So it's something that is becoming, I would say, the governments of this Sahel region now, not just Mali now, but including Burkina Faso, they are overwhelmed. And that's the reason why they've actually called for international help. But what is actually confounding in the case of Mali is that you have quite a number of French soldiers in that country. But unfortunately, it appears they've not been able to deal successfully now with this increasing attacks, to repel the attack. So it's a tough one. They're struggling to cope, and just in September, leaders of the region actually came together and they pledged $1 billion now, that they're going to contribute $1 billion to help in fighting the jihadis, help, for instance, in ensuring that the G5 Sahel force is up and running. So they are meeting again. The leaders of ECOWAS are meeting again this month in Nigeria, where modalities for the implementation of that pledge now would be discussed. We're waiting to see what happens. But the fact is that the governments in Burkina Faso and Mali are getting overwhelmed by this militants in their region.
Okay, thank you for that, Deji. That was CGTN's Deji Badmus there in Lagos on the security situation in both Burkina Faso and in Mali. Well, meanwhile, Australian mining company Perenti Global has said that it plans to exit its 2 mining services contracts in Burkina Faso. Perenti's statement follows an ambush of a convoy of workers at a Canadian-owned Semafo gold mine in early November. The gunmen opened fire on multiple buses, killing 39 and wounding 60 others. We are going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including thousands of delegates gather in the Rwandan capital to discuss challenges and opportunities in managing HIV and AIDS. And the contributions of African women leaders recognized in Guinea.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Economic data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm Uche reporting from Nairobi's city center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice.
The International Conference on AIDS and Sexually Transmitted Infections in Africa is underway in the Rwandan capital, Kigali. The week-long conference is a gathering for individuals, experts and various leaders committed to ending the HIV epidemic. The event will include the latest findings from researchers and other experts in the field, all with the aim of developing relevant strategies to tackle the disease. The Kigali Convention is expected to integrate emerging infections such as hepatitis and Ebola. It comes just a day after the international community marked the annual World AIDS Day. Well, for more on this, we are now joined by Wilkista Nyabwa, who is in Kigali for us. Wilkista, what is the latest from the Kigali ICASA conference and who is in attendance there?
Thank you very much, Karen. Well, there are regional leaders here, as well as researchers and scientists just members of different communities that are involved with just trying to halt the spread of HIV and AIDS, as well as, of course, persons living with HIV and AIDS themselves who are sharing their stories so that their voices can be heard and they can be part of the solutions that are being spoken of here. But really what is happening today has been the first day. There will be an opening ceremony later today, but there have been discussions since early in the morning, different countries and different organizations just sharing how they have been dealing with HIV and AIDS. And Rwanda is really the appropriate country to host this convention at this moment, because Rwanda has done very, very well in just managing HIV and AIDS. At this point, for the last about 15 years, HIV prevalence in Rwanda has been at 3%. At this point, we are informed that it has come down to about 2.6%. The prevalence, HIV prevalence rate here in Rwanda. So one of the things they're talking about what they have been able to do well, and it is something that the rest of the conference has also been talking about, just that ending HIV in Africa will require like a three-pronged approach, basically getting members of the public to get tested to know their HIV status, and those who are positive to go on antiretroviral therapy, and so that those who are on antiretroviral therapy, once they attain immunosuppression, once their viral load is undetectable, it basically means that they cannot transmit the virus. And this generally would be one of the steps towards ending the spread of HIV and AIDS in Africa. So those are the discussions that are going on here, Karen.
And Wilkista, what should we expect in the coming days?
Well, in the coming days, we do expect that apart from different countries just sharing how they have been able to tackle the epidemic, we also do expect researchers and scientists to share new findings, new programs that they are coming up with, how they are handling HIV and AIDS. One of the interesting things that, of course, many people are waiting to find out a little bit more about is a concept that is still being tested, which is the concept of having, instead of taking antiretroviral drugs daily, to have an antiretroviral injection that would last for 8 weeks, so that a patient would not need to take drugs every day. These are some of the discussions, as well as concepts such as self-test kits, which are something that Rwanda has adopted, as well as other countries, where people can go and buy these self-testing kits over the counter and test themselves at home, that they can reach populations that are afraid of going to the hospital perhaps, or of having other people know their status when they're testing. So these are some of the discussions that are just going to take place in the course of the week, so that at the end of the week, when delegates leave, they have a clearer idea of the approaches that they want to take in their countries. Karen.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Wilkista. That was CGTN's Wilkista Nyabwa there at the International Conference on AIDS and Sexually Transmitted Infections in Africa. In Uganda, there has been significant progress with the HIV prevalence rate, now at 6% compared to 7.3% in 2011. The country is hoping to bring an end to new HIV infections by ensuring those infected receive treatment and eliminate mother-to-child transmission. CGTN's Isabel Nakiria now reports.
At home, I never faced internal stigma.
Josephine Nabukenya found out she was HIV positive after reading her mom's will. She was only 8 years old at the time, and the news shocked her.
At that particular moment, I felt bad, right? Because we knew I was being taught about HIV at school. So I knew what HIV was, I knew there was no cure, and all the stigmatizing things that you get to know about HIV at first came to me. You're going to die, your mother's going to die, and all that stuff. But by God's grace, it did not affect me. It did not come along with me for a very long time.
Josephine's mom had enrolled her on medication without disclosing her status. Now at 26 years old, Josephine shares her story in a book called Beyond Status. The book advises young people to test for HIV and start medication if infected.
I mean, there is no suppression if you do not take your medication very well, right? And knowing that at such an early age has helped me. Ever since we started doing viral load, I'll be honest with you that they've never given me my results with I hear copies or you're not suppressed. I've always been undetectable. And it is always because of the good adherence that I've always had from day one. Not because it's easy, but even when it's hard, I find ways of actually going through and taking my medication regardless of the scenario. Have everyone.
Josephine now gives talks about HIV to various support groups. Support groups like this allow people living with HIV participate in activities together, as well as learn new ways of how to cope with the disease. And Josephine is here to ensure that they don't suffer discrimination like what she went through. HIV/AIDS agencies in Uganda warn discrimination can lead to drug resistance, affecting the health of HIV-positive people. People shy away from taking medication when stigmatized. The 2018 report by the Uganda Virus Research Institute shows 2 in every 10 people living with HIV suffered drug resistance.
It affects the fight against HIV quite significantly, because every time you have someone with the resistant virus, they are more likely going to progress to disease later on. This is someone who can pass on the virus, unlike someone who has a virus which is still susceptible to treatment and is well controlled, it's undetectable.
The government is trying to get as many people tested and put on treatment and to ensure they adhere to their treatment. And so Josephine says she won't tire talking to young people about the importance of staying on treatment with the hope of eradicating HIV from Uganda. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Let's return to one of our stories we were talking about earlier. The French military on Sunday repatriating the bodies of 13 soldiers who were killed during a combat mission in Mali. We can now go live to Eleanor Cassis, who is in Paris for us. Eleanor, 13 soldiers, as we were saying, perished in Mali last week and are now being honoured in France. What is the latest you have there on the ceremony?
So the ceremony starts in about 4 hours' time at the Invalides here in central Paris. Those 13 coffins of the soldiers killed last week will get full military honours. They'll be awarded France's highest honour, the Légion d'honneur, posthumously, and Emmanuel Macron will be giving a speech to lead that memorial ceremony. Of course, this has really shocked France. This is the largest death, the largest killing of French troops abroad for more than 30 years. But President Macron is not only paying tribute to these troops, but also aiming to make a political point to France's partners around the world through this military ceremony. Of course, French troops have been engaged in the Sahel alongside the G5 countries since August 2014. There are 4,500 French troops on the ground there, and 41 of them have now been killed since the beginning of the operation. Now, France believes that it is playing an unfair role in this operation against Islamist terrorism in the Sahel, and it wants other NATO countries to play more of a role in this. Of course, this memorial ceremony comes the day ahead of Macron heading to London for the NATO's 70th anniversary summit, and the clearest message that he wants to be heard there is that France is doing too much on its own alongside African countries against terrorism in the Sahel, and that other countries like Britain also need to play a role.
Eleanor, let's talk a bit more about that, the kind of financial commitment that France is making towards regional security efforts in Western Africa.
Well, Operation Barkhane, as it's called, is costing the French government 600 million euros a year and has done since the opening of it in August 2014. Of course, because of France's historic relationship with North Africa, and it was previously the colonial power in many of these countries in the Sahel, it does feel a certain responsibility towards these countries. But as I say, the French government really believes that other countries, other Western countries, need to be pulling their weight more in terms of fighting terrorism in the Sahel. Emmanuel Macron has stressed in recent days that this operation isn't just to protect the security of North African countries, but of course to protect the security of Europe, because Islamist groups who are, if they're able to flourish in North Africa, will then be able to plot attacks that could possibly take place on European soil. So he wants other European countries to see this as an urgent need for their own security, the fight against Islamist terrorism in North Africa, and he's hoping that other countries will also play more of a role.
Okay, thank you very much. That was CGTN's Eleanor Cassis there for us in Paris.
Chirping of birds, sounds of whispering trees, burbling of streams. When sunlight sets the forest's leaves aglow, and waterfall surges down from the mountain, we see and hear the Earth's wondrous beauty. The Earth is meant to be appreciated, and the life of its inhabitants deserves our endless exploration. Come with CGTN to listen and see, in chorus of life, to marvel at nature and life.
We've got all the business news coming up for you after the break, including Nigeria's power sector gets $210 million boost from the African Development Bank. And South African Airways is in talks with lenders for yet another round of funds.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The transmission company of Nigeria has secured $210 million in funding from the African Development Bank. The loan will be used in upgrading the nation's dilapidated power lines and distribution infrastructure. The project is aimed at improving the reliability of Nigeria's transmission grid in 7 states. It'll also upgrade power export and the integration of the regional power system to the West African power pool. After the project is implemented, Nigeria is expected to reduce the amount of stranded power and to increase evacuation capacity toward the north, where power supply is limited. South African disaster management authorities are working with local governments to find more money to help farmers affected by drought. President Cyril Ramaphosa says the state provided $18 million to help offset the effects of the dry spell, but given the severity of the crisis, that amount is simply not enough. Disaster management is also working with provinces and municipalities to see how they can reprioritise their budgets for relief and recovery. South Africa is in the midst of a decade-long drought that has left average dam levels at about 58% of capacity. Still in South Africa, the Minister of Public Enterprises, Pravin Gordhan, says cash-strapped airline SAA is in intense discussions with lenders to secure much-needed funding. Gordhan added that the airline would go through a radical restructuring process to ensure its financial and operational sustainability. According to the minister, a week-long strike by union members caused immense damage to SAA's reputation, operations, as well as its finances. The strike, which cost the airline an estimated $3.4 million, ended on November the 22nd. Gordhan's statement comes after Flight Centre said it would stop selling SAA tickets until certainty returned to the market. Meanwhile, both Santam and Hollard Insurance have withdrawn insolvency cover benefit on SAA tickets. Now let's turn to Europe. The new leaders of the European Commission are starting their terms in office with a pledge for a new beginning for the bloc. But can they deliver on such a bold promise? Our reporter, Mark Webster, looks at some of the issues that await them.
Celebrating a fresh lineup at the top, the four heads of the European family came together to pledge a new beginning for Europe. Though in the festivities to mark 10 years of the Lisbon Treaty, they weren't giving anything away about how they plan to achieve this. Instead, the two new presidents of the Commission and the Council were keen to stress European solidarity in challenging times.
The responsibility to leave a union that is stronger than the one we inherited. A continent in peace, with rights and liberties, a single market with unprecedented economic opportunities, and it is our duty to preserve this treasure.
No mention either that one of the biggest countries in the EU, Britain, is currently trying to leave the bloc. The new European Commissioner takes office at a time with a highly ambitious agenda, covering everything from climate change and digitisation to further curbing the powers of the big multi-tech industries like Google and Amazon. However, there is at least one other major issue in their in-trays: Brexit. And both the presidents of the Council and the Commission will be hoping it takes up far less of their time than it did of their predecessors. To the strains of the Ode to Joy, the official European anthem, the presidents of the European Central Bank and the Parliament joined the show of unity. But political analysts here say the reality is very different, and that the new Commission president faces a tough time.
She sets the bar very high, but ultimately it's not really up to her whether she will be able to deliver. She also needs to find or secure a majority in the European Parliament, which co-legislates in the European Union, and ultimately in all the most crucial dossiers like the reform of the Eurozone, but also, climate crisis. She needs the support of individual member states. And as we know, up till recently, they've been pretty reluctant, to take a bold action in those areas.
So do you think she's going to have a difficult 5 years then?
She's going to have, indeed, very difficult 5 years.
At least the former German defence minister can use her old knowledge to cope with pressure on the EU defence budget at a time of heightened tensions with Russia and Turkey over Syria. This show of unity may not last. Mark Webster, CGTN, Brussels.
Many of us enjoy fresh fish and seafood, but do we really know what we're eating? Over the past few years, plastic pollution has had a drastic effect on the fishing industry. CGTN's Tony Cheng has more.
Indonesian fisherman Imam lives on the beach in Muncang, close to where he works. But to get to his boat a few hundred meters away, he has to cross an ocean of plastic waste. The plastic, washed in on the tide and downstream from inland, has choked the beach and the waters around it, and the fish stocks have dropped dramatically.
Because there are so few fish these days, there used to be lots of boats on the beach. Now there are far fewer.
Things may look very different on the western coast of Galway in Ireland, but fishermen are afflicted by the same concerns. A recent survey showed that 100% of mussels caught in the British Isles now contain microplastics. That's a real concern for shellfish farmers who are seeing demand drop for their premium product.
I suppose it's all just suddenly come to light in the last year, couple of years. It's starting to, well, to the average person, and I mean it's been identified long before, but now we're starting to realise the problems that we think it is causing. So, but no, there's nothing. There's no compensation, or there's no ideas on how to try and curtail it.
Out in the English Channel, this trawler is fishing for a very unappetizing catch. They're looking for tiny bits of plastic, microplastic, to see what an impact it's having on the marine environment. And their findings show the tiny bits of plastic are not only getting into larger fish, but tiny fish larvae and plankton on which the marine environment relies.
So they might be small, you might not be able to see them, but they play such a vital role that if their numbers start to decrease and the microplastics have an impact on their population, it's going to have an impact on the whole of the marine ecosystem.
And those impacts are already being seen around the polluted waters of Indonesia, where the catches are falling sharply. The UN says that wild fish stocks could be exhausted in 30 years, a vital source of nutrition for more than 3 billion people around the world. A bit further out to sea, the fishermen pull in their nets. Not much in their haul, an indication they'll have to head further out to sea, away from the polluted waters on the coast. Imam and his crew are trying to get what they can from the sea today, but there are very few fish out there. And his father says that in the past decade, fish stocks have plummeted. Now, plastic pollution isn't the only problem. There are also issues with pollution and overfishing. But at this stage, no one's doing anything about the vast amount of plastic waste that's floating around in these waters. Tony Cheng, CGTN, just off the coast of Muncah in Indonesia.
We are going to a short break, don't go away, lots more to come, including we tell you about a little piece of linguistic history that's exciting lovers of indigenous languages in South Africa.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
In South Africa, linguistic history is being made after students at the University of Cape Town graduated from an indigenous language course with roots that date back more than 200,000 years. The Khoisan are known to be one of the earliest inhabitants of southern Africa, but their language was mostly lost through the ages, with colonialism said to be a major cause. CGTN's Travis Andrews has more with this report.
With 1/3 of the world's 6,000 languages all spoken in Africa, the continent's linguistic roots are certainly deep. But Khoi Kavab is a language so rare that there are only said to be 167,000 speakers left. Today, though, there's reason to celebrate, as these lot are the new crop that will play an important role in preventing the total loss of the language. They graduated from the University of Cape Town's first Khoi Khoi Kavab language course, a move which the institution hopes will be an historical intervention.
History in the making. This is the first time of its kind at any university that this is taking place. We urge other universities and other institutes to see the important significance of doing the promotion, the preservation and the development of Khoi Khoi Govab, of Khoi Khoi language. This is such an important thing because we have lost so much things, and here we have an opportunity to, within our lifetimes, to actually restore something that's so invaluable. This is not only something that we're doing for present people, it's also for future.
Most of its speakers are centered in the greater Namaqualand area, but here in the Western Cape there remains not only a community that cherishes their rich history, language and culture, but new speakers wanting to learn more.
I found out about it, my mom found out about it, we came straight away, and the course itself was an amazing journey to go on to learn this language that was used by my ancestors, by everyone's ancestors. Definitely made a change in my life, and it makes a change in everyone's life, just even to know a few words out of it.
The course is being offered by the University Centre for Extramural Activities and comes after the traditional and Khoisan leadership bill was just signed into law by President Cyril Ramaphosa. Khoi Khoi Kavab may be one of Africa's most endangered indigenous languages, but this university has even bolder plans than its introductory course. It also aims to make it the fourth language at the institution, after isiXhosa, English and Afrikaans, which will assist efforts in promoting indigenous Khoisan languages and multilingualism at the institution.
We need our official language status. In fact, we also need each of the various languages, like the Kung, the Nama, the Khoi Khoi Govab, the Ngu, the Khoi Dam, and all the languages belong to the Khoi and the San people, the Bushmen. Each one needs their own language board, so it can be more specialized development, because now broadly they are all clustered into one language body.
For now, though, the ceremony caps off years of activism work done by the Khoisan community and academics to further enrich the pool of knowledge that can make this linguistic treasure something that is never lost to the ages. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
In Guinea, African women in leadership roles have been recognized for their contributions to society. The awards ceremony held in the capital, Conakry, focused on advancing the agenda for women and girls on the continent.
These are the women recognized for their achievements. 5 women from 4 African nations received this year's All Africa Women's Leadership Awards. Jenny Kaba Konde is the First Lady of Guinea. She received the honorary prize for women's leadership. One of our latest programs helps girls in Guinea to pursue the sciences.
The women who motivate me the most are the ones I see early in the morning unloading goods from trucks in the markets. It cannot leave me indifferent. That's why I'm helping women and girls.
Morocco's Rita Znaba heads a foundation for abandoned children. She was awarded the Economic and Social Development Award.
The award I received, I dedicated it to all the women of the world who fight, knowing that the conditions of women are often not easy. Nevertheless, they manage to overcome all the difficulties.
Malado Kaba was Guinea's country's first female Minister of Economy and Finance. The Economist received the award for good governance.
I have spent my entire career in the public sector. For me, this award is recognition and encouragement to continue. This award is also for my mother, who has been a role model to me.
Ami Kwame from Cote d'Ivoire launched Ayana Webzine some 8 years ago. The founder of the digital platform received an award for tech and entrepreneurship.
The biggest challenge is access to funding. The second biggest challenge is creating synergies between African women so that they can act for their sisters in different countries.
This is the 5th award ceremony organized by the All Africa Global Media Group through their All Africa Women Agenda initiative. The organizer says that strong female leaders and access to education for girls is critical for the development of the continent. Daniel Arab Moy, CGTN.
Senegal has hosted the 6th edition of the Africa Cup of Urban Dance in the capital, Dakar. 24 dancers from different countries took part in the event. Organisers hope to prepare a growing number of dancers to participate competitively on international platforms.
Dancers flocked at the venue, La Place de la Nation in Dakar, to showcase creativity in breakdance and hip-hop. The goal of the event is to promote cultural diversity and to create spaces for training and cultural exchange.
Africa lacks infrastructure for dance. Dancers do not have a place to train or the means to become professionals. There are no places where dancers in the continent can meet to exchange ideas. So we said, why don't we create one? There are European Championships, there's European Cup, there's one in Asia and the United States, and why not have one in Africa?
The competition hopes to promote talents of dancers to contribute to Africa's cultural development.
Being a member of the jury, we judge a lot of criteria: the presence on the stage, the originality, the creativity, and especially the property and the musicality. These are the factors which must be distinguished for one to win.
Further validation came in the classification of dance as an official sport under the Association of IOC-recognized sports federation list.
As dancers, we're very happy to also see that urban dance was introduced in the Olympics list of sports. There's a future because we just have to believe in it. This tells you that what we are doing is a job just like any other.
The dance no longer has the place it deserves because it was sacred before. Before, our grandparents, our great-grandparents treated the dance as really sacred symbols. Today, when you tell a man that you are a dancer, it's taken as an insult. People think that dance is for the thugs, yet we can go to school and dance like me, for example. I have a degree in computer science, but I am a dancer. I remain a dancer, and I will remain a dancer.
According to the organizers, they hope to make Senegal one of the hubs of urban dance on the continent. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
All the sport coming up for you after the break, including